Welcome to Inside New York's Art World. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein, and with us tonight is one of the critical fathers of the New York School of Art. For 30 years, Tom Hess was a principal contributor and editor of Art News, and as a critic, now of New York Magazine, an editor and a curator, he helped to create an exciting, shattering, new visual rhetoric, abstract expressionism, including the first book on that subject, and that was written 25 years ago. Why don't we begin by comparing the world of New York artists when you started to now? Was it better or was it worse?
It was smaller. Of course, there was less money in it. There's a much stronger local, regional, parochial school. The remnants of socialist realism and regional art were the dominant faces in the galleries. The masters who are now internationally famous, which is Pollock or Kooning, were not so much unknown as beleaguered, known to the art world public, unknown to the wider public. Being unknown has its advantages.
What are they?
Well, you're not, you don't have any taxes, and you have a lot of time to do those things that time permits you to do, lead a more contemplative, the life of a free spirit is more easy. Good and bad are troublesome words in a person's life anyway, aren't they? Those seem to me the salient differences in the world between then and now.
Your time at Art News.
Could you ask Mr. Hess to talk to us rather than you, because we can't hear him. When he gets to a word and turns to you, you can't hear what he says.
Well, perhaps you might like to come sit up closer as well.
Well, now I busted the mic.
Let's see if we can help you.
I don't think it's where my head goes. I think it's the mic, you know, because
your time at Art News coincided with what may have been one of the most excited and exciting periods in American art history. It was that time that a confluence of circumstances created this new international prominent art, with both American and New York art at its forefront. Tell us about some of those times, won't you? About the artists who were forging this innovative style. Perhaps you could be specific and tell us some things about the first shows of Pollock, the first shows of Barnett Newman, de Kooning, all of whom whose work you not only early identified, but are certainly considered, I guess, the foremost authority on the work of de Kooning.
Well, it's difficult for me to see these things in terms of historical events because they seem very recent. And Pollock's first show was at Peggy Guggenheim's Gallery. It's called Art of this Century, which was on West 57th Street.
How did that come about?
Peggy Guggenheim was a collector and an ardent friend of the surrealist artists. She had been based in Paris. She came here bringing in her train Max Ernst, André Breton, Tanguy, a number of the European surrealists.
This is post-World War II.
This is in the middle of World War II. This is between the occupation between the conquest of so-called occupied France and the total occupation of France by the German armies. That would be in 1942. I think she arrived in 41. The gallery, I went to the opening of the gallery in the summer of 42. her advisors, the permanent collection was the star attraction. It included all the great surrealist artists, Chirico and Paul Klee included, Max Ernst and Dali, a lot of Marcel Duchamp. Peggy Guggenheim wanted to, felt a certain responsibility to America and American artists, and wanted to show them also. And she had as advisors a very far-seeing dealer named Putzel, who in turn was a friend of John Graham's, who in turn was connected with the downtown artists. And she showed Jackson Pollock at his advice. She also showed Clifford Still, Vaziotis, Robert De Niro, his wife Virginia Admiral, and Hans Hofmann, and a number of other artists.
At the time, was there any sense of the importance of what was happening?
Well, it all seemed terribly important. It probably seems more important then than it does now, because now the importance seems historical, which I find trivial, or monetary, which is incomprehensible. It seemed very important in terms of someone finally making it, or breaking through the rather icy reserves which bound the art world. It was very difficult for an American artist to be shown at all outside of the accepted idioms of kind of romantic realism or socialist realism. Those, let's say, to give you some names, someone like Birchfield or Hopper or Wyeth was not known until 1942. The followers of Benton, people you probably aren't very familiar with, like Guy Dubois.
Incidentally, the Art News review of the first Pollock show has a rather critical appraisal and was quite on target identifying this new talent. And at the time, as you recall, it was the custom to quote in some shows the prices of the works. It was the upper limit of his range for those shows was $150.
Now, I don't know, I wasn't at Art News when I was in the Army at that time. It was during the war.
46.
Yeah. However, I married my wife in 44, and we bought a Pollock at that time. I think it was rather reasonable, but seemed like a lot of money.
How much was
I don't remember. A lot of money.
What part did criticism of the time play in developing that work?
Well, criticism, it's a curious force. Dumb criticism has no impact. On-target criticism facilitates something that might happen anyway. Pollock was covered with invective by critics who were totally unprepared for his approach, who were still having a great deal of difficulty with Matisse of the 1920s and with Picasso, who felt that, I don't know, I mean, make a big point of Pollock being $150. You could buy Max Ernst for $300. And Max Ernst, the previous generation in terms of fame. So, I mean, prices mean nothing. But Max Ernst was famous.
But Pollock's canvases were large then, too.
But those most were large.
Yeah.
So were Ernst. But anyway, the point was that most critics were still American critics in the New York Times, the Herald Tribune, the World. There was the Sun. I don't think the Post had a critic. We're still a Time magazine.
Did TM have a critic?
Mostly sports writers. I don't think Ad Reinhardt occasionally wrote very witty cartoons for PM in the 40s, in the early 40s. But as soon as the editors found out what he was up to, they fired him.
What about the early action painters attracted you?
But the whole phrase of action painting is one I object to, because I don't think it means anything.
You helped disseminate it to the world in an article.
I never used it. I published a lot of things I don't.
Perhaps we should tell them what we're referring to.
It's a phrase coined by Harold Rosenberg in an article which was brought to my attention by Elaine de Kooning, a very well-written article, which I was very happy to publish over the dead body of the then editor, I might say, who objected violently to it. But I never thought the phrase action painting meant a hell of a lot, because it referred to an idea of the painting in the process of being painted. It did not refer to the finished picture. And it could not account for the art. In other words, I don't know if you want to go into this digression.
No, please do.
In theory, the painter gets himself into a kind of creative state. He confronts his blank canvas. He's seized upon by certain spiritual, psychic forces. The painting comes out, and that's the action painting. Then this thing happens again. Now the problem is these paintings look exactly alike. It's sort of funny that these creative forces and psychic energy should all be repeating themselves. I mean, there's something else is at work here. Quite obviously there's styles at work, pictorial intelligence is at work, planning is at work. It's not at all a matter of a Zen throw of the dart. It's a matter of pictorial thought. Writers often can't conceive of visual thinking. That's, I think, the problem. They think if a person doesn't verbalize in a kind of A plus B plus C plus D formulation, there's no thought going on at all. It's like a kind of vegetable growing in your backyard.
What would have been a more apt term to describe that school?
Oh, I think abstract expressionism, for all its faults, was it's an old term formulated by Kandinsky to describe his work. It's close enough. New York School is being used now. It has a funny sort of ring of école de Paris to it, like a translation.
Perhaps it is.
Well, it certainly was. It was, I think, coined by a dealer out in the West Coast named Frank Pearls.
Well, during the course of the years, you've not only written books and edited magazines and written criticism, you've also developed and arranged for shows in various museums. I think we will start with the latest one and then work backwards. Tomorrow, a very significant show opens in Albany. I guess tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And you are the director and the curator of that show, and it is entitled New York, The State of Art. Because of the scale of the works, it doesn't seem likely that those works will travel. Perhaps you could, it won't travel, will it?
I don't know. It'd be nice if it could go to the World Trade Center or someplace like that.
Certainly would, but in the event we don't get an opportunity to see it, perhaps you would talk a review for us. How have you defined the New York experience? What does that mean?
Well, you see, actually, it's 3 shows. I'm only doing 1. There's a show on folk art, and there's a show on the Hudson River School, and there's a show we call the New York School, which is painting and sculpture, which I'm doing. William Gertz is doing the Hudson River School, and folk art is being done by Dr. Bishop of the Crafts Museum here. They're vast spaces. Normally I wouldn't have been interested in the project. It celebrates the 200th anniversary of the governorship of New York, which is probably one of the most unmemorable anniversaries you can think of. It also, it's within the context of a larger thing called the I Love New York Fall Festival.
Doesn't sound like your usual umbrella, Tom. What lured you?
I was wondering, how could they use the word fall? You know, you think of decline and fall and default.
The alliteration.
Yes, they really should.
What will the show look like?
Anyway, I accepted the idea at the urging of Bill Gertz because there are 40,000 square feet of raw space, totally empty space.
This is part of the Albany Mall.
It's the Empire State Museum, which has a ground floor. And it's just vast. I mean, it's Nelson Rockefeller's his idea of what a museum should be. Just a lot of space. And it's enormous. So we got Richard Meyer, who was a brilliant younger, or younger means older than young, as you know, younger architect. And he has arranged a kind of Greek white village inside this space, with enormous walls and colonnades and avenues and streets and windows. And we have about 100 works of art, several of them over 100 feet in length. Most of them are around 30 feet long. So my idea was
F111, 100 feet?
F111 is so long no one's been able to measure it. They keep losing bits of it, you know. It's this huge piece by Jim Rosenquist. And it's up there.
Who are some of the artists that you featured in this? And well, how comprehensive? What
it starts
period?
with Gorky. It starts with Albert, I guess, in terms of chronology, but the thing begins with Gorky, a very beautiful picture called The Diary of a Seducer. And it ends with the generation of Richard Serra, Jennifer Bartlett, and that group of people, young under 40. There's been no attempt made to get into the very interesting, even younger group like Mary Miss and people like that. It's just a matter of, frankly, I don't know, I'm not sufficiently familiar with them.
On what basis, what were the criteria for inclusion in this show?
Well, there are no criteria. You see, I really don't believe in criteria. Now I've said it, you know, now you know.
Well, what are the characteristics?
What I was looking for is to get a lot of big pictures together and see what it looks like. Because one of the characteristics of New York painting was scale. Now, it's a very interesting problem because there were stylistic background and there were technical imperatives, which we can go into.
Please do.
To oversimplify, in this kind of situation, everything has to be oversimplified and everything's slightly wrong. But if you start throwing paint on the floor like Pollock, or you paint uninflected, even strokes like Newman, or you wash colors on like Rothko, or you push enormous brush marks like Franz Klein, you are flattening what we call virtual space. Virtual space is the space, the illusionary space the artist plays with on the flat canvas. Actual space is the real flat canvas. Virtual space starts to approach an identity with actual space. In other words, the forms get flatter. Now, when this happens, obviously, logically, the image should get bigger. And it did. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. The image at first was kept within certain limits by pure economic necessity. People couldn't afford the large studios. Later, there were technical problems. I mean, the canvas only came in certain widths. Little by little, these various technical problems have been overcome until you finally get the painting moving outside a frame into hundreds of feet. But this is not a sort of a purely American situation. It also is deeply rooted in the European experience.
Being the curator of a show.
Oh. Well, I don't find reviewers are so interesting, really.
During the course of the years, how has your own criticism changed? Are the standards of judgment that we or you use different now during the course of the last 30 years?
As one knows more, one can bring to bear more facts and ideas upon an issue. And of course, as one knows more, one forgets more. So that's it's a difficult question. I think one becomes less and less sure, which maybe is a form of wisdom or just a form of cowardliness, I don't know. I don't think that's for me to say. It's hard to judge that.
Well, in your experience and in your opinion, does the writing report, reflect, or create the art?
Oh, the writing doesn't create art.
Well, it helps validate and certify.
No, art does itself. It can't give out any visas or passports. Writing about a work of art is like writing about anything. You're writing about a character in a book, a landscape, a view from a window in Africa, a fictional idea. Writing is just plain writing. If the subject matter is art, and the writing is accurate about the art, it will be convincing, just as a character in Tolstoy is more convincing than a character in the detective story.
Who have been your principal...
I'm not sure I'm making that at all clear.
...critical ancestors?
Well, when I was young, I liked, of course, the people like the great Baudelaire, people like Baudelaire, and I read the Fry and Bell, and some of the Germans, Riegel and Wöfflin, Burckhardt. It's just standard. Meyer Shapiro, Alfred Barr.
Herbert Reed?
No, I never. I liked him as a novelist and a poet. I didn't think he knew anything about art.
Whose work do you admire now?
Among the critics. But the same people, the same group.
But then you touch upon a problem that I hear discussed more and more, not only in the visual arts, but in the performing arts. In fact, I guess in literature as well, and that is that there is a dearth of new critics. Do you see that as a...
Well, I think dearth is a perpetual condition of everything. There's a dearth of artists, a dearth of sculptors, a dearth of critics. People say in good time, when there's good art, there's bad criticism, and there's good... I don't know. I think it's almost impossible to judge your immediate contemporaries. And it's certainly impossible to go back and say, what about myself? It's impossible to judge yourself. I don't see myself as I am. I see myself as I was, probably. It's impossible to look around. I think there's a lot of good criticism today, I think. Barbara Rose does. You had Bob Hughes the other day. If you heard him, he's very eloquent and very bright. Rosalind Krauss, Betsy Baker, Carter Radcliffe, David Shapiro. There are many. I think you might make a sort of a banal, factual note. There seem to be less artists writing about art today than there were.
And how do you explain that?
Well, I think a lot of artists, when I was hiring reviewers, I tried to hire artists. I think they're extremely good. They bring a sense of actuality and a sense of describing a work to make it, as you can see it. A lot of them had bad experience. They became typed as writers, and they had trouble making it as painters.
Well, I'm thinking of some that you, during the course of the years, did engage in some critical way, and Robert Motherwell, Robert Goodenough, Fairfield Porter.
Well, I think you'll find a lot of them, if you talk to them, would say it did not help their careers. It did not help.
And what was the limitation? The verbal facility, the cliche, if one can describe something?
When you get down to selling pictures, you get down to kind of a basic prejudice of the public. And it seems the public doesn't want smart-ass writers as painters. They want their painters to be dumb. This is an idea. I'm not sure it's true or not.
Actually,
but,
I was
Sam
reading...
Coots told me, he said, you just can't sell a painter who's a writer. They just don't buy that. Because it's a ridiculous idea, and Coots is a ridiculous man. But there you are. What are you going to do about it?
John Galbraith says that, in his Galbraith Reader, that the public still wants the artist to be poor. That in terms of the economic scale, we have an investment in the artist as the individual entrepreneur to be outside of the economic structure, and we want him always as the supplicant.
Well, I
think that still holds true?
I noticed that writers would like artists to be poor. Writers especially the sort of the partisan review writers, intellectual writers, think it's outrageous that these nudniks are making a fortune
Well, since Partisan Review pays a penny and a half a word, we
Yeah.
can understand why.
But, and I think the public has a love-hate relationship to rich people anyway. I don't think they care about artists any more or less than movie stars, automobile racers.
Do you think they're that glamorous a figure in terms of the larger public?
Well, I just don't know. I don't know. I imagine the people who've heard of an automobile racer, I can't name the name of one automobile racer. I suddenly think of that. I suppose a lot of people know. They think I'm a complete moron. But have they heard of who? Calder? Picasso? They've all heard of Picasso.
Picasso and Dali, and that's...
Or would they envy that much? I don't think. I just don't know.
Were you ever an artist?
Yeah, I did some painting, yes. Yeah.
When did you do that?
When I was at the university, in school.
And who were your principally informed your vision then?
Picasso, I like Picasso very much, and Clay, and all the young man's
Was it the literary
fantasy.
aspect, or
No, I like painting. I liked it very much. Applying paint to canvas.
And
And
the medium
our
that
teachers urged us to paint. Our history teachers at Yale. And I would just urge anybody who wants to be an art critic to try all the mediums. You should know how to do oil painting, fresco, watercolor.
Why did you stop painting?
I had nothing to say. There was no subject matter. I had no subject matter.
By all accounts, the current period in art is one of diversity and eclecticism. How do you see it now, and where do you see it going?
Well, a critic who prophesies the future is trying to snow you. That's a rule of the thumb. Don't believe him.
Or avoid you.
What? Because no one knows what will happen. It seems to be we have a very eclectic situation now, but I'm not sure to revert what I've been saying before, that the present doesn't always seem eclectic. Things aren't sorted out. Right now, it would seem that a realist like Al Leslie, showing at the Guggenheim Gallery now, an abstract painter such as, who's showing around abstract art? Just trying to think. My mind always goes blank when I see that bunch of faces.
I'm just thinking of this week's opening as Leger.
Leger? Where?
No, Nördler.
Oh, I'm at a Mondrian. There are people at downtown, the Pollock Gallery, who do abstract. There are many, many possibilities open. I think there always were.
Well, in recent times, there seems to be a movement away from art as a precious activity, beginning, I guess, with the period of the action painters and taken to the extremes currently of self-mutilation in some cases. What observations do you have of any of these new art forms? And I'm thinking of word art, performance art, the new importance of photography, or architectural drawings. Perhaps we should take them one at a time. We'll leave the mutilation for last.
What do I think about these manifestations?
Word art and performance art. Why don't we start with that?
They all seem very valid. None of them seem terribly new. Anybody who's read Alice in Wonderland's got a lot of word art. There's a whole English 19th century tradition of nonsense word art, which is, and of course Marcel Duchamp played with it, the Surrealists played with it. In other words, but the Americans have a capacity of reinventing the wheel, so to speak, picking up a European idea and doing it afresh, as if it had never been done before. There's a kind of joyful innocence to the American artist. So I think he could reinvent that, the word art. What's your other?
Performance art.
I mean happenings?
No, I mean more in the spirit of Laurie Anderson, some of the works of the kitchen.
Those are kind of happenings, aren't they?
Except more on an individual basis.
Yeah, sort of solos. I think that's terrific. You know, I don't think. I see no difficulty. I mean, you always have a form of art, always. I mean, going back to the Greeks, which approaches the theater. Theater is a kind of visual, pictorial thing which has a kind of dramatic space to it, which isn't the space of reality. It's a visual space. Visual artists will tend to get mixed into the theater. They'll do scenery, they'll do the theater architecture like Palladio. They may become actors, mimes. They may paint themselves like Red Indians or certain religious sects, Africans, Eskimos. These things, I think, are just normal human creative behavior. And the one difference is, in the last 200 years, there's no religion informing it anymore. We live in a fragmented society, and the artist can't get a sanction from a priest or a king.
Unless we substitute another figure for that person.
I mean, from a psychological point of view. But it's very difficult. That's not a social. There's no niche in society for someone with this psychological hang-up. Is there? Maybe. I don't know.
Well, one functions and creates. What do you think of the new importance, not so new anymore, of photography?
Photography is, I think, just debased painting. And
is it because it is duplicatable?
We all love debased art, so we all love photography. No, photography is just a form of image making. And it's square, because paintings are square. You know, the lens is round. And photographs should be round. But they put behind the lens a square frame, just like a picture has a frame, which gives you a square, or a rectangular, photograph. And then they're usually composed like a painting, except instead of going to all that sort of dumb work, granted, you click. And it's terrific. I mean, I've almost never seen a photograph I don't like.
How about an architectural drawing?
It's a very low level of art.
How about architectural drawings, this season's phenomena?
Mm-hmm. Well, they can be very interesting, because there you get, we were talking a moment ago about art as it approaches theater. These are art as it approaches science, as it approaches geometry and engineering, and today the more advanced technologies, computerized researches on materials and things like that. And there you get, the word is interface, a very interesting interface. And
what about that failed revolution of the 60s, that promised revolution of the influence of technology on art? Do you see that having a second coming?
It was wonderful. I hope it comes back. Because the technology never worked. All those magnetic art, I was all busted within 2 minutes. And I mean, the art looked great, but the motor stopped functioning. No, I like that. It has absolutely great future.
Because it has no past?
Well, it's got this nice past. No, I think that's all right. Automatons, I think, are wonderful.
You mentioned earlier the 40,000 square feet at the Empire State Museum, and suggested that that was Nelson Rockefeller's, somewhat whimsically you suggested, that was Nelson Rockefeller's view of what a museum should look like.
The basement of the museum.
What are your views of his and his fellow trustees' views of what the Museum of Modern Art should currently look like?
Oh, you want to get into the art politics. You don't want to talk about art anymore.
We'll get back to it. But isn't that part of art?
Not really. I mean, it's sort of gossip.
To determine a building that will house and exhibit art that deals with questions of planning and finance and development.
We can gossip about it. It won't affect it. I think they're making a mistake. I think they're making a bad mistake. Because I think the future of museums in America is to become like the museums in France and in Italy and in England, which are largely state-supported. I don't think private money is going to be able to support the museums. Therefore, the museums will become socialized. Therefore, it's rather short-sighted to build a condominium tower whose clients are supposed to be the richest people in the world, plunked on top of this socialistic understructure, if there's going to be a problem, and the government's going to come in and say, we're going to give you money, but we want you to get rid of all those sheikhs on the 15th floor. And, you know, they shouldn't do it. But they're going to do it, I think.
Well, do they have an alternative to taking in boarders?
I don't believe in this either or. I mean, museums are always putting pistols to their heads and saying, unless you do exactly what I want, I'm going to shoot myself. Well, that's, I think, infantile behavior. And I think they should do something else. You know, I don't care what it is. I think they should obviously limit their collection to say 1870 to 1970, like if you've been to Paris, the Jeux de Paume Museum, which is Impressionism, and cut it off, or sell the early stuff if they want to, but at least limit themselves.
You're saying they should be a museum of modern art rather than necessarily of contemporary art, and that
they should have some limit. They can't be in an infinitely big collection. Then they should have an exhibition space outside of a Kunsthalle, outside themselves. The traveling shows can be held by the Guggenheim, the Modern, and the Whitney together. And it's just these things are liable to solution. Solutions will be coming.
Do you see that, by the way, as the future direction, these cooperative shows between the museums?
I think they'll have to get together.
Is it a question of economics?
Yes. I think in small towns, universities and museums will get together. And in large towns, the museums themselves will get together. Like they already have in San Francisco. There's one museum directorship for 3 museums.
Are you suggesting that the future direction of the museum is an educational institution, or that it always was?
In small towns, I think it's a waste of money to have an art history department and a bunch of curators in a little museum. It might as well be the same people. And they should work the same fundraising apparatus. I don't at all think that museums are educational in the sense the university is. I don't think art a painting is a slide.
We won't get into that subject. I'm talking about the Metropolitan's facility, unless you'd care to. A painting as a slide. I could not resist that transition, Tom. Speaking of controversies, is a painting a slide? How do you feel, because it appears at this moment that the potential Annenberg collection is a thing
Not collection, you mean center.
A center, rather, is a thing that is now past. But what do you think of the role of a mass communication center in a major institution?
Well, they'll all have them. Again, because of the socialist nature of I foresee for museums. Museums will be funded by the various municipal, state, and federal entities. In order to justify their funds, they're going to have to show some social function. Now, they just can't take the Giottos and parade them around the streets of the town. They're going to have to go out to the classrooms, educate the people in the classrooms, and bring them into the museum, and with all that closed television stuff and videotapes, they'll have to do all that in order to show that they should get money.
We know that deficit financing is a way of life for all cultural institutions. One of the ways that we've sought to remedy that, and there is more and more talk about that, I guess not only between museum directors and the art community in general, but the public who will be affected, is more and more about the power struggles going on within museums. And what I'm referring to is the conflict between the director and the voluntary heads, or the presidents and the boards. And as we know, some museums are now considering a solution of a paid president and a paid director, one being the administrative director and one being the architectural historian. What do you think of that as a solution? Will it end up being a two-headed monster? Can the art historian make aesthetic judgments without the administrative director, who will ultimately be the fundraiser, either approving or vetoing the amounts of money for any show? How do you see that web?
Short range or long range?
First short range and then long range.
Short range, I think they're going to do it. I don't think it's a very good idea.
It is not a good idea, you're saying?
You know, I don't, in my opinion, because I think the big job is fundraising. The way to raise funds, I think, is to speak with conviction. And the only way to speak with conviction is to know what you're talking about. And what they think is conviction comes from a kind of eloquence, which I think it's a mistake on it, but I may be wrong. In the long range, I think it makes very little difference. These things do work out. I was going to say, even in the worst bureaucracies, things get done. And I suppose Galbraith would say that it's probably more efficiently in the big economic picture, because there's a certain amount of waste, which puts money in various pockets, and it's all within the economy. So.
But ultimately, we are also talking about aesthetic judgments that I guess are always defined and confined by practical considerations like dollars and cents. But do you think that they will be more and more limited? Can one make that kind of tidy division with an art historian conducting the museological aspects and...
Well, the person who's got the money is the person who's going to run the show.
Sounds pretty grim.
Well, no, it's not grim. That's home. But and that's how it would be. And
that was the short term.
It's by short term.
Now, long term
makes no difference, I think. I mean, the short term is they're going to find out. We're really gossiping now. Short term is they get a good man as director, he'll quit. Because he'll find the president is assuming all the power because he has all the money. So they'll get an amenity as director. Or the good man's going to make a big fuss and convince the board that they were wrong, and they'll fire the president. But, one of the two will go.
So you see upheaval in this period of experimentation.
This upheaval is a very strong word for an art historian, moving in and moving out. It's a
revolving door.
I mean, baseball managers do it. Just as much grace under pressure.
You are the acknowledged authority on the work of de Kooning. Not only did you write the first monograph about him in 1959, almost 10 years later, I believe it was 1968, you directed the de Kooning International Retrospective for the Museum of Modern Art. In your book on his drawings, you shared, I thought, among your interesting insights, significant analysis of what the woman really meant in de Kooning's works. And as I recall, you likened it to Albert Square. I believe you called it the donné, the scaffolding.
The given.
Can you amplify what you meant by that and what it does mean?
Well, this, it's not me, this is de Kooning.
We're talking about Hess on de Kooning now.
No, he talked about this to me. And his idea was that an abstract painter has to invent all these shapes out of himself. So he is really faced with a whole bunch of non-pictorial necessities. And we're talking about pure art. He's faced with a bunch of impurities, which is the invention of these shapes. Whereas he, de Kooning, takes a woman who has a forehead, two eyes, a nose, a mouth, ears, and so forth. That's his given, or donné, hypothesis. And from there on, he can take it easy. Then he can paint. You see, and everything is pure painting. That was his distinction. That was really his reply to people, the formalist critics, such as Greenberg, who would say the introduction of a female head into a modern painting is anomalous and is a impure literary quality which destroys the and so forth.
Is it analogous to the Albert Square?
Well, the Albert Square, no, it's the opposite of an Albert Square, you see. Oh, I see what you mean. As in terms of a format, it's a given format. Yeah, right. There's the face is a format, and the figure is a format.
Can you give us some idea of your view of the influence of de Kooning on 3 generations of artists?
Well, it's difficult to even consider that, you know. An artist influences other artists in many ways, just by being there and doing something. He can influence an artist who's doing something entirely different, just by his presence, that there's someone working who's getting through. In other words, in America, there's always a great doubt about the very possibility of existence as an artist. Stuart Davis once said, you go back to your hometown, they say, what are you doing? And you say, well, I'm an artist. And then they say, well, what are you really doing? And see, whereas in Europe, you say, well, I'm an artiste, you know, and they say, well, it's good. And you can charge the groceries.
Do you think those roles have reversed continentally now?
No, I don't think so.
Well, we certainly
in New York, maybe. I think New Yorkers are mighty. They're not very aware of what's going on outside of New York.
Well, we have about 30,000 art makers right here.
It's not very many. We have 220 million people.
I mean, 30,000 art makers in New York.
I say, but New York is very isolated. If you go to New Orleans, or where are you from?
Not St. Paul.
Birmingham, any town, you'll find, you must know it yourself.
Is New York still necessary?
Well, capitals are essential in modern culture, yeah, the cosmopolitan capital.
Is it still necessary for an artist to make it in New York?
Well, making it is one of the more vulgar concepts we have. No, I don't think so. You mean financially making it? Making a lot of money?
No, I'm talking about making it as a painter. I think it's, perhaps, you're quite right, it's a rather inelegant phrase, but it quickly describes...
It's a good book by Norman Podhoretz.
It quickly describes...
I don't mean you were voting.
No, but it is an inelegant phrase, but that long since, as a result of Mr. Podhoretz's, I guess now 15-year-old work, describes the assimilation of the creative person into a culture as he wends his way, one hopes, upward and upward. And if one of the manifestations of that mobility is financial reward, I see no reason why he or she should be denied that as well.
I think you could define it in a sort of a Zen way. In order to make it in the New York art world, you have to be in New York.
Okay.
But you make a lot of money.
Or you can be in Queens.
You can make a lot of money. No, that would be the Queens art world. You could make a lot of money with never coming to New York. You can be. There are art worlds that we don't even know about.
I learned of one this morning.
Wally Finley Gallery. You ever been inside the Wally Finley Gallery?
No, I have not, but I learned of one this morning. And that is a man who does art only about sports figures, which would an American phenomenon. No, I guess that he is the person who has spawned this generation, and this man is an artist, a delineator of the Olympic athletes.
I saw him on television. Isn't that Neiman?
No, this is a successor whose name I don't recall, but what I do recall is the press release in trying to convince one to interview this man indicated that sports are indeed an American art form, and Bruce Jenner in the long sweep of history will be known as one of the most significant athletes of all time. And he is the only one who has recorded him, and he has recorded him to the tune of $2 million worth of lithographs a year. And I must tell you, I cannot remember his name.
But then you see, there are art worlds outside, right here in New York. I mean, I think that there's the Wally Finley Gallery, and they have Simbari. There's a big ad, and it says, the catalog raisonné of Simbari is being completed. And anybody who owns correspondence by Mr. Simbari would send his photostats. It was very serious. I never heard of this.
When I was talking about Queens, what I was really leading to was the whole rise in the alternate space, which I consider to be significant and worthwhile. They have obviously made a dent in commercial gallery importance, or have they?
No, I think, to go back to our idea of scale, where we were long ago, one of the things in all modern artists long at some point to be reunited with society. You know, to have the role they had in the Renaissance when they could go to a church and paint the Virgin Child, and everybody it'd be wonderful. But one of the ways the artist longs for is to get back with the common man, to get back with workers, to get back on the street. So artists have to wear workers' clothes, drink in workers' bars, use workers' language, and there's a very conscious kind of nostalgia for what we all think was an Arcadian moment of history, moment in history.
Does this explain this rather homey movement?
I think also the alternate space, you want to get out of the sort of miserable asceticism of the art gallery, and the whitewashed walls begin to hurt your eyes, and then everything's so manicured. You want a kind of other reality.
But there are
historical
precedents, and of course I guess two most famous ones are the Armory Show and the Salon du Refusé. Do you think that does keep art, as those proponents and some of the current ones declare, fresh and untainted?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I think you have to have both sides of the equation. Every possible option should be open. I think it's hard enough to have an exhibition. I thought by alternative space, I thought you meant outside of the art world altogether, like the PS1.
Well, I don't think of that as outside of the art world. It may be a parallel structure, but I think it is...
Well, in the sense, it has a different structure. It has studios and people working and showing all in the same big complex.
Do you think that is a significant movement?
Yeah.
Artist cooperatives and showing their works in their own studios as well?
Yes, I think anything that reinforces, that has openings away from the rather, things tend to get very restricted, things that, especially when they're successful, financially. Anything that breaks that up a little bit, I think, is healthy.
Well, with the limitations of space of a weekly column and the fact that there are so few of them, and in spite of the fact that you, Tom Hess, are always looking and continually looking at new work, how does a yet to command wider attention, if ever, artist hope to gain your attention?
Well, usually when artists make themselves known through other artists, it usually happens an artist comes around, starts to work, meets other artists, they talk, and then an artist becomes known among artists. And then one of the artists has a gallery. It's a system really of mutual help.
And then the word is out, and this critical mass helps.
Then there's usually an exhibition of some sort. And it's got a lot to do with the temperament and personality. So there's a lot of mistakes are made. A lot of people we all think are wonderful are just wonderful people, and the work isn't so hot. And but that's okay, because maybe the work is hot after all. Things change, opinions change very quickly. In 20 or 30 years, one changes one's mind.
In the next 20 or 30 years, I wonder how we will view, I guess, the most recent minority expression in art, and that is feminist perspectives. A while back, you edited, along with Linda Nochlin, a work that was called Woman as Sex Objects. And certainly, feminist perspectives have contributed substantially, I think, to a new way of analyzing art. Do you find that there is a change in art making as a result, or art criticism as a result of that?
Well, I think there was a change in art making. Certainly, I think a feminine, I'm rather hazy about the proper use of the words here, feminine iconology, a female iconology. A number of interesting artists experimented with this concept. Whether you can will subject matter at all is problematical. Whether you can will an ideological subject matter is even more problematical. But given those two difficulties, there's no reason why it shouldn't work. I notice that they don't seem to be doing it so much anymore. I may be wrong in that.
I think you're right, but I think it reflects what has occurred in the feminist movement in general, and obviously it has its effect in all aspects.
I think the movement made us aware of the very great difficulties under which the women artists worked in the past. The question was, why have there been no great women painters? And the answer was, why have there been no great Eskimo tennis champions? And then they gave all the reasons.
Well, you're referring, of course, to Linda Nachman's splendid essay.
But what's happening now is they're saying, but there were great women painters.
Well, they're saying it right now in Brooklyn. And how did you view what they said there?
Well, I think there weren't any great women painters. I think they were right the first time. They really are not very good artists. And of course, as Linda Nachman pointed out, they weren't allowed to study from the nude in a day when the historical painting was the best painting.
Doesn't she point out that since there were no women were permitted to go to life class?
That's it, they couldn't study from the nude.
So what they had to draw were cows.
Or still lifes.
Yes.
Or portraits, mostly portraits, or landscapes.
Is there no one in that show whose work stirs any positive critical response?
I'd advise everyone to go to the show. It's one of the most interesting shows I've ever seen. But I'm very interested in sort of third-class work.
Is it the particular examples of those painters, or the fact that you really
third class, I mean, third class is very good.
Third class among first class.
Titian's first class, Guardi's second class, something like that.
I think on that note, there must be several people who, in the class, who would like to join me in thanking you, Tom Hess,
thank you,
for being with us tonight, and also to join in the interviewing process, and that they will now have an opportunity to ask you questions. Thank you, Tom Hess. I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein, and this is Inside New York's Art World. And now we will ask the class to share in the process. If you have a question, will you please raise your hand, and I will try to call on as many of you as possible. And if you could please try to talk a little more clearly than we have been able to, so that everyone can hear the question. Are there any questions? And please, too, remember we are gathered together in the spirit of enlightenment and joy. No personal hobby horses. Sir.
Tom, I have a question. I'd like to know a little bit about how did we get ourselves in a situation in which we need art critics? There was a time, as you pointed out, when art had a lot of religious purposes, and there were no art critics, or none that were very in the forefront or known. How did we just historically get to the state where we seem to have a need to have art critics?
Well, I feel no particular urgency to justify myself. I've never been to a discussion where this question wasn't asked. I used to find it embarrassing. I don't anymore.
But now that you find it predictable, you must have some response.
It usually comes later. And no, my response is I don't feel any need to justify myself. And
are you a painter, the asker of that question?
No, I'm in an art gallery.
Well, then you especially do. Sorry?
I'm an art dealer.
Are there any other questions?
No, it wasn't a personal one, it was a historic one.
He understood, I think.
I don't know.
Do you feel the same way, and this is not a defensive response, because I think the spirit in which you asked that was obviously sincere, but in the evaluation of any body of work, be it literary, musical, obviously I would think that at any point in time, at that point in time, it isn't a matter of taste, but there is assigned to a particular body of people the opportunity to evaluate work.
It's such a long, complicated thing, and it's so obvious that one of the reasons critics are around are to help dealers sell works. It's such a it's really one can't go into the whole history of taste from the 16th century on.